Hello and welcome to another episode of Lowdown. Today I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by the Director of Player Development at FC Cincinnati, Larry Sunderland. Larry, welcome to the show.
Hi, Connor. Really good to be here. Looking forward to speaking with you.
Yeah, it's been great to finally get you on after a few months.
Yeah.
Larry, as we do with everybody who comes on the show, we ask them, how did you manage to cultivate a passion for the game? Which I'm more intrigued to hear more so in your case, seeing as you grew up in the United States, of course, at a time where predominantly soccer or football, as we call it, wasn't the most popular of sports.
Yeah. Interesting. I grew up in New York, just outside New York. And I'm a little unique because I grew up in the game. My dad was involved in the game. And my dad was is American, U.S. citizen, born in the U.S. He was involved in a lot of different athletics. He was an athletic director at a university, but he just became passionate about soccer. And he was, I guess you could call him one of the kind of the founders of the growth of the game in the U.S. He helped to bring the New York Cosmos to New York. He developed a lot of the college soccer programs in the U.S., founded something that was called the Senior Bowl, where the best college seniors came together and played and were hopefully drafted into pro teams. And that was really where it started for me. He founded our local youth club. And then I just started playing from the time I could walk. I was playing, and he was a college coach. So I was around a lot of foreign players and just, on the field, kicking the ball around after the games. And it just grew into a passion of mine and a love of mine. And I played for a long time. I played professionally for about 13 years, but I always knew I was going to be a coach. Always was preparing to be a coach / teacher as I was playing the game. And then things kind of just fell in line when I finished playing, and I was fortunate, to meet the right people and to be in the right places at the right time, just to have some opportunities that enabled me to be kind of where I'm at now.
Of course. And it sounds like you didn't really have too much of a choice in the matter, being surrounded by football at such a young age. But one intriguing point there, Larry, you mentioned is you always knew that you were going to be a coach. You were even preparing to be a coach whilst you were playing. I mean, how young did that realization come across yourself? Was it during your playing days, or was it a more conscious, aware choice when you were younger?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly when it happened. I was 15 years old, playing high school soccer. And, I was probably an average player as a 14, 15-year-old. And I got the opportunity to work a camp that summer, to work a soccer camp in upstate New York. It was called Camp All America. It was run by the U.S. national team coach at that time, Walter Chisowich. And it was an overnight camp, and I spent a number of weeks working there. And I was basically, I shagged balls. I did whatever the senior coaches wanted me to do. And I got a real taste for being around some of the best coaches in the United States at that time. I got a real taste for coaching, and I loved what they were doing. I loved being around them. And then as a byproduct of this, he had national team players from England working the camp, U.S. national team players. And every night when all the campers would go to sleep, we would play. And I was fortunate enough as a 15-year-old to be playing with some of these guys that were national team capped players from around the world. And I improved so much just by being around them, both as a player and in my understanding of the game, that I knew the two things I wanted to do is I wanted to become a professional player, and I wanted to be a coach. I knew those. I just knew at that point that was my pathway. And then I began to prepare for that, both as a player and as a coach. And ever since that point at 15, I worked camps whenever I could during my off season. When I was playing, anytime I had an off season, I tried to coach as much as I could. And that was just kind of, I guess you could call it a deliberate pathway I took.
And I suppose what's paramount today in today's youth development is instilling that curiosity in modern day players. I mean, back then, from 15 years of age, if you back then, I mean, we're taking such a reflective stance and looking at the game from a 360-degree view point. I suppose it makes perfect sense. That would prolong your playing days. Am I correct in saying? I mean, us as coaches nowadays, and you in your own esteemed position as director of player development at FC Cincinnati, I mean, there's a case to be said there. If we can teach players how to critically think, as opposed to what, years ago, it was always about what players should think. The days of the autocratic coach are certainly gone. It's more the players we have that we're producing nowadays, the players that the US are producing nowadays are certainly critical thinkers on the pitch. You look at that player profile like Gio Reyna, Brandon Aronson, Christian Pulisic, they really are one of a kind.
Yeah, I think, I think one of the keys to the modern player now is self-regulation, right? And there's different things that we create within an environment to develop that and to develop some of the autonomy that's needed to be a self-regulator. But I think it was something that I kind of had just maybe naturally, or maybe because my dad was a coach, but I was a self-regulator in such a way that I knew where I wanted to go. So I was always reflecting on how to get there, be it as a coach or as a player. And you mentioned, prolong a playing career, right? Yeah. And I actually think, look, I probably wasn't the most gifted soccer player out there. But I knew what I was good at, and I knew how I could best support my teammates and be useful to the team, right? So that allowed me to have a career, because I know there were a lot better players out there than me that didn't have a career and didn't make it as professionals for whatever reason. But I do think a lot of it has to do with your ability to self-regulate and your ability to come back and say, to reflect and say, this is what I need to get better at. This is what I need to learn. This is where I can best serve. And then to put some of those plans in action on what you need to do. And it certainly wasn't easy for me, because I certainly had my setbacks along the way, but I tried to learn from each of those setbacks best I could and try to implement those learnings that I got from it and try to improve on it.
And is that self-regulation? Is that a one-size-fits-all? Should it be player ownership, or should it be led by the coach initially?
Boy, that's a really good question. I think it happens differently for every person. I think everybody has, sometimes I call it an ignition. And I think everybody is ignited by different things at different times. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's a simple word from a person that you respect that all of a sudden hits home and goes, oh, wow. Yeah. And that's just your ignition to begin thinking in a different way. But I do certainly think there's something to a person being the summation of their experience, right? Be it an experience from age 0 to age 10 or age 0 to age 60. I think along the way there's different ignition points, but it's certainly a summation of all that stuff that maybe helps to build the self-regulator.
Okay. And then, Larry, with that being said, I mean, how would you describe your own current role within FC Cincinnati? And maybe just for everybody listening, what does the day-to-day look like?
I think, yeah, my current role, my best description of it, and kind of the reason I enjoy it, is because I work in the gap, right? I work in the gap between what someone is and what someone can become, right? And that's kind of my purpose. That's my why. So that's my job. So every day I need to be thinking about how I can best help everybody I associate with, right? To better fulfill their potential. Because, let's be honest, if this is what I think I'm good at, I don't know. I'm trying to get better all the time. This is what I think I'm good at. It just happens to be that today I'm close to a soccer field out here. I'd like to think that the skills that I'm trying to develop can translate to really anything. I may not know, I may not know the X's and O's of the financial world, but I do think some of my skill sets and some of the tools that I employ to make a soccer player better translate to the financial world, translate to the business world, So So ultimately my day-to-day is really dealing with things that I hope can make our players better.
It's a question of perspective, though, isn't it? It's how do you quantify and how do you measure success? I mean, having spoken with you numerous times now, Larry, and other esteemed technical directors, academy directors, from what I can see at, professional clubs such as FC Cincinnati, you guys are playing much more of an infinite game, so to speak. It's not just the short-term results.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of developing potential, right? And I think I've always had a hard time in judging success in this world. There are some people. I was with someone the other day, and I said, "Okay, so how do you judge success, in an academy?" And they were able to rattle off a few things, and I was like, "Man, it's hard for me to do that, right? Because a player graduating from the under 15 team to the under 17 team as player number 18 on the roster could be a huge success for that player. Whereas others on the outside may look at it and go, he's player 18 on the roster, he's not successful. Well, in his own right, he's very successful. So I think it's an individual thing. I think in our world, yeah, we're judged by, ultimately we're judged by how many players we push through to the first team. That's what it is. But I do think it's an infinite game because we're working on so many levels, and it doesn't end, does it? It's not like, all right, it's not like you win a game and that game's over. It's very different than that. I don't feel like there's ever any end in sight.
Yeah, but then the added complication is that there's no two clubs or two different academies playing the same infinite game. I mean, you have external factors then, like the environment, so to speak.
The variables are infinite, aren't they, in themselves?
I mean, guys like yourself, I mean, you've been privileged to have worked with the likes of the US men's national team. You've worked in different environments like Chicago Fire, Portland Timbers, now FC Cincinnati, at different stages of each academy's development.
Yeah.
I mean, from your lived experience, I suppose, how crucial a role does environment play in shaping that player?
Yeah, it's critical, right? It is, and when you say environment, I think culture, yeah. Right? And when someone says culture, I think environment. I think they're interchangeable. So I think it is the underpinning of everything we do, because if we get that wrong, then it becomes really, really difficult to maximize potential. Right. So when I think of environments, I think about motivation, I think about psychological safety, and those things under values, right? And those things underpinning what content we want to teach, our methodology of teaching, the creation of our pathway, so I kind of think about, maybe soft skills and hard skills, or maybe EQ and IQ. And I really think that the environment and the success within that environment is under the foundation is soft skills. The foundation is, emotional intelligence. and then you can get into the hard skills, and then you can get into the content and the curriculum and the methodology and the pathway and all those things. But I really think, like you said, the environment, it's critical to the cultivation of potential.
Of course. And with that being said, I mean, what was it like to enter the doors of FC Cincinnati, building an academy from the ground up, having to shape a philosophy, build a culture, recruit staff, recruit players? What did that process look like?
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, and it was one of the things that really drew me to the club. I really, look, like I said before, I work in the gap. So it's all about what something is and what something can become. So, maybe maybe some people call that building, right? And I enjoy building. So it was great starting from scratch. And, and I had to first think about building our environment, the starting environment, and that, and that's about the right people. And I came here because in my interview process, I heard a lot of things that ticked boxes for me about the culture, about the environment. So what they were trying to build, overarching, right? So now when I came in, it was about getting the right people on my team. And that was kind of my first step. And it was important, because if I got that wrong, then and it's okay to get it wrong, right? Because then you have to adjust. But I knew if I got that wrong, it would slow things down. And, fortunately, I've got it right. I mean, it's not perfect, but I have really good people around me that are smarter than me, better than me at some things, that challenge me always, that, that make me laugh a whole lot, that are happy to have beers together. If they happen to have a beer or coffee together, if it's coffee, it's a good team that I'm fortunate enough to have here. That allows the other stuff to come really easily.
Exactly. I think it makes a huge difference no matter what industry you're in. If you love getting out of bed in the morning, obviously going to work, and maybe one level above that, if you're with people who obviously respect your competence and they create that kind of psychological safety within the workplace, it's paramount. And then, I mean, what does the FC Cincinnati philosophy look like, Larry, both on and off the pitch, for developing this talent?
Well, we try to be pretty deliberate with everything we do, right? Our identity, we've kind of, there's a few things about our identity. I won't go through all of it, but there's a few things about our identity that I really like. We call it a relentless path, right? So and PATH is an acronym, and we kind of use it with everything we do. And sorry, what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to my computer because just bear with me for 1 second, because I will share something with you while we're here, and I wanted to word it right. I hope I'm not messing up the podcast here.
No, not at all.
Okay. I want to share the wording with you because it's intentional and it's important. So I wanted to make sure I say it the right way. So, and this is our identity within the academy at FC Cincinnati. We, like I said, we call it the relentless path. Okay. And this incorporates who we are on and off the field. And we've kind of phrased relentless as we always hunt in defensive transition. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to make our identity visible, so that when anybody came to see us, we could say, yeah, we're doing this. This is our identity, or not. And then we have to work on it. So relentless has to do with three things. Okay. We always hunt in defensive transition. I'm going to say always. We are always looking for a quick restart, and we want to dictate possession and tempo. Okay. So this has to do with an aggressive mindset. Okay. We think it's better to be aggressive than it is to be passive. Right. So these are aggressive things. We want to aggressively hunt. And where do you see it? You can really see that in defensive transition. We always want to be aggressive when we get the ball. So we want to have quick restarts, right? And then we want to dictate the possession and the tempo, right? So we want the ball. So this is kind of an aggressive stance for us. That's the relentless piece. So all of our players understand that to be relentless. Now we have our acronym, which is PATH. And the P stands for problem solver. Very important for us. We want to display that on the field, both collectively and individually, right? So I think often we look at player development, we talk about the individual too often. It is also very, very much so about the collective. So we want to problem solve as an individual, which might translate as 1v1, right? Duels, but we also want to problem solve collectively. How do we combine to solve problems? Okay. We problem solvers, we want to communicate on the field, right? To solve problems, to organize and to solve problems, right? And then we always want to have a proactive mindset. What does that translate to? That translates to our transitional moments, let's say, right? We want to be proactive. So as we're attacking, we want to be thinking about how we're going to manage the defensive transition. Okay. So these things, you can see how they relate to on the field, our identity. The A in Relentless Path, the A is an acronym for adventurer. This directly relates to our environment, right? Because we want our players to be adventurers. We want them to take risks. So we want them to play forward. We're looking for our players to play forward. We're looking for our players to always create advantages on the field. And we're looking for our players to display confidence, to display eagerness, to display a forward-thinking mentality, right? So how do we develop that identity? And I'm kind of going on tangents, but how do we identify that identity? How do we develop that identity of an adventurer? Okay, we have to have a psychologically safe environment to allow for a player to be an adventurer. Because if every time they tried to do something and failed, if we yelled at them, are they ever going to be an adventurer? If it cost us a goal and we got on them about losing the game because it cost us a goal, are they ever going to be an adventurer? No. So it has to relate to our identity. It's very, very important and it's very deliberate. T is for team first. It's about a service mentality. We serve each other. While we do believe in the individual in our academy, it is about the individual serving the team. So it's really critical. And I found over my career that the more I work to serve someone else, the more things I get rewarded with, the more things that come back to me. We look for team first in our defending mentality. We defend as a collective, right? We work together. We really don't have any, let's call them luxury players, right? Everybody has to work for the collective. And then team first talks about how we support one another. So if I'm watching a game and a player makes a mistake and another player has a negative comment to that player, well, then that's not our identity. And we point that out, right? That's a team first. We don't criticize one another like that. That doesn't mean that we don't have hard conversations as teammates, but we do, because we've created that ability to do that within our identity, right? And within our environment. And the last one is H is for humble. And I think this is kind of unique. We try to embrace imperfection. We want our players to fail, and we want them to embrace that. And we want them to learn from failure, right? If they're afraid to fail, they can't be an adventurer, right? If they're afraid to fail, they can't be humble, because if you're afraid to fail, it's ego-based, right? If I'm egocentric, I'm afraid to fail because I'm always comparing myself with someone else. So I can't fail because I'm ego-centered. I can't fail. So I won't try new things. I won't adventure, right? And I won't embrace that failure. So humility allows you to do that. We practice within our academy, we practice compassion, right? In order to be humble, we have to be able to forgive our teammates when they make mistakes, forgive our coaches when we make mistakes, right? And then the last thing with this idea of humility and being humble is that we really want to be, grateful for everything we have and everything that we're doing. So we try to express gratuity, right? So it's one thing to talk about all these things, but then I think it's really important that you are deliberately trying to build them and encourage them, right? So for instance, with this idea of gratuity, we often do things. I did this with one of our youth national teams. Everybody got a journal, right? And on one of our camps, we said, listen, we're going to mark down twice a day. We're going to mark down when we see someone else in camp display gratuity, right? Saying thank you, or having a nice thing to say about somebody, or recognizing somebody for something they've done, right? And then we're going to mark down in our journal 2 things that we want to be grateful for and that we want to show other people, right, in camp. And it was an awesome experiment now, because I'm going around and I'm trying to find reasons to be grateful, and I'm recognizing when other people are being grateful. And it really just builds this culture, right, and this environment around the team that is pretty unique. And I talk about this working deliberately to do this, because if you don't work deliberately in creating your environment and creating your culture and creating your identity, if you don't do it deliberately, there's a vacuum, and something always fills the vacuum. And what fills it, you may not be happy with.
And that's utterly fascinating, first of all.
Sorry, and that was very long-winded. Sorry.
No, it's really exceptional stuff. For me, you hear so much said and uttered about the psychosocial components of the game. How reflective is this philosophy you guys have established, albeit the relentless path at Cincinnati? How closely does that embody the values of the working class, perhaps of the surrounding community, the surrounding area, that blue collar workforce? Is it?
Yeah, that's a consideration, right? That's a consideration. Yeah, that's a consideration to our identity, for sure. You know, when you talk about the relentless, you know, that can be tied into your community, into Midwest blue collar, hardworking values. Absolutely. I think that's an important part to your identity, right? Yeah, you know, there's certainly, you know, there's an identity to Brazilian football, right? You know, there's, I think, look, I think there was, and I do believe, like most everything, that your identity evolves, right? And Connor, you made mention to like the U.S. national team and some of the young talent that's coming through the U.S. national team now. Yeah, I think our identity as a footballing nation is evolving as well. You know, I think if you go back 20 years, I would think that if anybody was to say, what's the identity of an American soccer team, you know, and it was hardworking. Yeah, I mean, because that's what we had that we could rely on, you know, and that brought, you know, whatever our level of success, it was driven by our hard work. And I don't think you ever want to lose that, but I think now we're growing more things, right? And we're beginning to develop more of an identity, you know, and it's building on maybe that hard work, or we hope it builds on that hard work, but now we can build different pieces to our identity, and our country and our culture in the United States is very different because it is such a melting pot. Man, I think we're just scratching the surface on what our identity as a national team is.
Well, I do too, having lived in the States and just even following the US men's national team and the women's team, their progress from afar. You look at the stylistic fit of the team, you look at the current coaches, what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
compared to the likes of 10 years ago. Physically, the size of the US men's national team players, it's very, very drastically different compared to what was seen at the 26 World Cup in Germany, the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. But just to get back to what we said earlier on, Larry, about bringing through homegrown players, that really is priceless. Having one of your own, two, three of your own on that pitch wearing that FC Cincinnati badge in the MLS. I mean, look at Barcelona, La Masia. The
Yeah.
reverence those guys will always forever be held in by the fans, by the coaching staff, by their counterparts. Chelsea, as a Chelsea fan myself, watching them win a Champions League with 5 or 6 coming straight through from Cobham, absolutely huge, possibly the greatest achievement ever in the club's history. I mean, you can't put a price on that, can you?
You can't. No, you can't, because that's connection.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, you spoke about the social aspect of what we do. There is a huge psychosocial aspect to supporters, right, and fans of the game and the community around your club. It's massive. I mean, in England, it's so much more than it is here. We're beginning to develop that, though, right? That is coming, and it's pretty organic. And I think, as human beings, we all look for this connectedness, right? And this is something that, as a modern coach, we need to be aware of, because this as much as we're talking about, supporters right now and the connectedness to the club through homegrown players, right? It's massive. There's also how do you form that connectedness with players within a team, within a club, right? I think all those things are really, really important. And this is what makes the game of football really pretty unique. I don't know. I can't think of another sport really, and I'm thinking the US and I don't know. Are there other sports that you have, like homegrowns, that come through an academy system into a first team? We don't have that in any other sport here in the States. No. Maybe in rugby, maybe in some places,
Yeah. I think, of course, other sports always, other sports like football, like our own sport, have pros and cons. But I think certainly in terms of what football is able to do to society, to bound people together by wearing a similar colored jersey, it's really incredible. I mean, the game stopped civil wars in the likes of Africa, the likes of Asia. It's brought millions together worldwide. And I think even tonight, interviewing yourself, Larry, or speaking with you on this podcast, I have tons of questions I could ask about, KPIs, analytics, where does that fit in? But I think at the end of the day, really, as you said earlier on, it comes down to the soft skills. And you look at players coming through the ranks now, it's stuff you can't measure. It's like resilience, determination. Brendan Rodgers at Leicester City, he always speaks about the player that comes through is the silver medalist. It's not the gold medalists from when they're 13, 14, 15. Arsene Wenger speaks about the train of youth development. Players get off the train every year, other players come on. But if you stay on the train long enough and show perseverance and determination, you'll eventually come through. I mean, how crucial a role does this play in youth development?
Yeah, it's critical, isn't it? And so go back to some of the things I was talking about before, about this idea of embracing failure, right? That aspect, you mentioned perseverance, resilience, right? That aspect is critical to the long-term success of a player, right? I don't know any player that's made it to the first team level that hasn't shown great resilience, and that at some point hasn't had to rebound from adversity, right? I don't know of any players made it at the highest level that has had this linear trajectory, from youth soccer straight through to the pros. And if they're out there, my guess is as soon as they face adversity, because they haven't built that resilience along the way, it's life-changing, and often results in catastrophe, right? So you think about the player who's always made the top team all the time, and then finally gets to the first team and is not selected. How they deal with that. It's often a traumatic moment in their life, right? And they don't recover from it because they haven't learned the skills, right, along the way to grow resilience. And yeah, certainly you can't grow resilience without experiencing failure, without experiencing setback, because it's all about the reaction to that. So this is why, I mean, within our identity, we want to, sidetrack, there are a lot of the most successful businesses in the world now that actually go out and try to fail fast because they believe that's how they learn fast, and then they could grow exponentially from that. So this is, I think it's kind of modern thinking. I'm not so sure that 25, 30 years ago, you'd be hearing this type of stuff. But I think it's critical in growing resilience, and we really want to embrace that for sure.
And how does that look within the academy environment? Is that something which you'd look players to go through on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, seasonal, to go through that adversity?
Yeah, it is different. It's individual. It's different with every player, right? But a simple example could be a player who's, on our 17s that has started 5 games in a row, right? Now there's going to be a conversation with that player that they're not going to start the next game. And you have a conversation, why they're not going to start. Maybe it's because someone else has to start. So now they have to learn the skills of supporting a teammate, right? And serving a teammate. And how am I serving that teammate? I'm serving that teammate by giving up my spot today for him to grow, for him to play, for him to have an opportunity. That's a little bit different, isn't it? That's a little bit different. And then there's there are players that are released at the end of a season, right? And within the academy, it's really important how we deal with that. And this is why academies have regular evaluations with players and regular discussions with players. But I think one of the places that many academies, and I'm guilty myself, fall short is when that player is released, it's thank you very much and goodbye. And I've come to really feel badly about that, and we're trying to employ some different strategies where there's actually follow up with that player, not just follow up to see if he's becoming better again when he goes back to his old club. Is he improving, and is he somebody that we want to bring back in the academy? Not just from that standpoint, but from the actual caring standpoint. Checking in 2 weeks later, how are you doing? How are you dealing with this? What can we do to help? Checking in a month later. How are things going? Are you doing all right? You emotionally okay? How are things going at your new club? So I think these are different things that aid in the growth of resilience, help to grow an environment that we talked about, an environment where we actually care for the player as a person, and not just as a player, and not just as an asset, but actually as a person, and ties into the idea of holistic development. I think it's critical that we're thinking these ways, and these are different ways of thinking for sure.
It all goes back to what you said earlier on, though, about having that ability to self-regulate. It's not just for the players, it's for the coaches too.
Yeah, Connor. So this is not the person. I am not the coach I was 10 years ago. Are there still some things in the toolbox of that coach that I was 10 years ago that I sometimes go in and dig out? Yes, but probably not that many. As I look back, I go, man, I'm not so sure I like that guy I was 15 years ago. I know as when I retired from playing and went into the coaching end of things, man, I was probably not a very good coach. At the time, I thought I was really good, but now I look back, I probably wasn't really good because man, it was all about winning. It was all about ego. It was all about driving players. And yeah, and I had it wrong, maybe I had it right for a couple players that connected and related, but I don't think I certainly didn't have the toolkit to help everybody to develop. And I believe now I'm not close to the finished product, but I believe now at least I care more about the development of every player, not just the player that's going to be on the first team.
What you said earlier on as well rings a bell, that gap between what is and what can be from a coach's perspective. Like someone like yourself who's been on that journey, that constant kind of journey of discovery, of evolution throughout your career. What questions should coaches be asking themselves if they want to bridge that gap and be an effective developer of young talent?
Yeah, I think just like we develop talent, right? When we're looking as player developers, we're looking at a player not seeing him today. We're looking at a player and seeing him 5 years from now.
Yeah.
6 years from now, 10 years from now, right? And that guides us, right? That's kind of our compass to where we want to go and how we want to help that player grow. And that compass is constantly being pushed out, right? I think the same is true. The same is true as a coach. I think, there are really great role models out there as coaches, right now that are employing some of the things that we're talking about here, Connor, and are finding tremendous success. And by success, I mean the low-hanging fruit of success, right? And when I say, and we were talking about success before, the low-hanging fruit of success is wins and losses. That's the low-hanging fruit, right? Unfortunately, for the masses, it's the low-hanging fruit that people are judged by, right? So thank God that some of these guys that are the Jesse Marshes out there, you know what I mean? The low-hanging fruit is coming through too, So now people are looking at Jesse and going, man, he's so successful. He's so successful. Well, okay, they're looking at the low-hanging fruit, getting to the Champions League, moving to Leipzig now, his pathway is coming. But let's look at, the picture of the iceberg, the little bit above the water and the big bit below. Let's look at the big bit below that's leading to Jesse's success that everybody sees in the wins and losses, because that's where all the hard work is, and that's where all the growth is, and that's where all the reflection is. And that's why it's really cool to see like Jesse succeed, because all of us that are learning to believe the same things that Jesse believes, we gain credibility, from that.
Of course, but we've seen players make the jump to Europe, Larry, with devastating effect, albeit recently too. Can coaches join Jesse Marsh on that journey to Europe? Can coaches domesticated in the US previously wouldn't have gone abroad? Can they make that jump to Europe and embark on a similar path?
For sure, if the opportunity is there, for sure. Yeah. And so just like a player is brought into an academy and gets the opportunity. Jesse got brought into the Red Bull family, and that created opportunity, that created exposure, and obviously he showed his talent clearly, right? And that allowed him to kind of propel himself. Yeah, it's about finding that opportunity, and there will be, because of Jesse, right? And others, there will be more opportunity, I think, for American coaches overseas as time goes on. And look, and I think the idea that there are more and more players going overseas now and finding success, American players going overseas and finding success, that trickles back to coaches as well. and I think as American players begin to gain more respect in Europe, I think that has a knock-on effect to coaches also, So I'd love to see that. I also think it takes a great deal of courage for American coaches to give it a go in Europe too. There's courage. Can somebody learn a new language and go, and do they have the perseverance, the courage, the resilience to go and start in the 6th division in Spain, and battle through? I think those days are coming. Those days are coming.
I think the same opportunities are out there for everyone. It's just, it'd be a pity to see your good friend Jesse's legacy not being followed up upon, if you get what I mean. I mean, what he's done is absolutely terrific within Europe, and making that jump up to Red Bull Leipzig this summer, which will be extraordinary to watch next season, will be an awful pity not to see other coaches follow in his footsteps and make that jump to Europe. I mean, I was going to ask you, Larry, what does success?
But that comes back to the low-hanging fruit.
Well, yeah.
Right. The more guys that can get that low-hanging fruit of success, and then get the opportunity, and then be successful. Now the pathway just keeps going. I often sometimes before you can be a prolific success, you have to be a prolific failure. Sometimes you just got to go, and you got to fail and fail and fail over and over again before you can eventually find that great success, and it may take years and years, right? Because the next few that follow Jesse, maybe they fail. And that slows down the course a little bit, but then the next one that goes and succeeds and perseveres will open more doors. And eventually the pathway will be there.
Of course. I was going to ask Larry, what does success mean for you in your role at FC Cincinnati? But I think after a discussion, I think a better question would be to ask, I mean, what do you hope your legacy will be? What will it look like in 10, 15 years at FC Cincinnati?
Yeah, I hope the legacy is built to the culture and tied to the environment and the climate that we create. I hope around the entire organization, right? I'd love, if you put a model in front of me and said, what would you like FC Cincinnati to look like? And I can point to a really good picture is like Bilbao, right? I'd love us to be known as this culture, this environment that just produces players from our academy, from our market, from Cincinnati that move through to the first team. And that would be an awesome legacy, and done the right way, with an identity, right? Within an environment. That would be an awesome legacy for sure.
And finally, to close, Larry, any coaches out there, be they in the US, be they Irish, be they in Europe or wherever, wishing to embark on a similar journey as yourself, what advice would you have for them?
You know what? Trust yourself. That's what I would say. Trust yourself, and always work to prepare for what might be next.
Simple.
I mean, I think that's a pretty good model.
Larry Sunderland, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thanks, Connor. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and it's always great to share ideas and just talk football and player development, people development.
Of course, let's get round to in the books.
Absolutely.
Okay, Larry.